What if I told you that Africa just gained access to over $100 billion in development funding without the strings attached by the World Bank or IMF? What if I told you that Africa just gained access to over $100 billion in development funding without the strings attached by the World Bank or IMF? Because that's exactly what happened when African nations started joining the BRICS New Development Bank. And what comes next could completely reshape how Africa funds its future. But here's the twist nobody's talking about. Stay with me, because in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to show you 3 shocking ways this changes everything for African development, and why Western financial institutions are quietly panicking. All right, let's start with the basics. Most people have no clue what the BRICS New Development Bank actually is. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These 5 countries created their own development bank in 2014 because they were tired of being sidelined by traditional Western financial institutions. But here's where it gets interesting, and I'll tell you why this timing couldn't be more perfect for Africa in just a moment. The New Development Bank, headquartered in Shanghai, started with $100 billion in initial capital. Unlike the World Bank or IMF, it doesn't impose structural adjustment programs or force countries to privatize their resources. Wait, let me pause here. Do you know what structural adjustment programs actually do to African countries? They force governments to cut social spending, privatize public services, and open their markets to foreign competition. It's basically economic colonialism with a fancy name. The BRICS Bank operates differently. They focus on infrastructure, sustainable development, and green energy projects. No conditionalities. No forced privatization. And this is where African countries saw an opportunity that could change their entire development trajectory. But first, let me show you exactly which African nations are already making moves. So here's what's been happening behind the scenes. South Africa was already a founding member, but now we're seeing a wave of other African countries joining or expressing serious interest. Egypt became a full member in 2021. Bangladesh and the UAE joined in 2021 as well, showing this isn't just about the original BRICS countries anymore. But hold on, here's something most analysts missed. The BRICS Bank isn't just accepting any country. They're being strategic about expansion, and Africa fits perfectly into their long-term vision. Africa has 1.3 billion people, massive natural resources, and the world's youngest population. But here's the kicker. Africa needs $170 billion annually just for infrastructure development. The traditional Western banks, they've been providing maybe 10–15% of that. So where's the rest supposed to come from? This is where the BRICS strategy gets genius, and why African leaders are quietly celebrating behind closed doors. BRICS countries get access to African markets and resources. African countries get funding without conditionalities. It's a win-win that the World Bank never offered. Take Egypt's membership. They immediately secured funding for renewable energy projects and infrastructure development. No demands to privatize the Suez Canal. No requirements to cut education spending. But this is just the beginning. What's really got Western institutions worried is the type of projects being funded. Let me show you 3 types of projects that are about to transform Africa and why they're giving traditional donors nightmares. First, cross-border infrastructure. The BRICS Bank is funding massive connectivity projects that link African countries together. Think railways connecting Ethiopia to Djibouti, or highways linking Nigeria to Niger. These aren't just roads, they're economic arteries that reduce Africa's dependence on Western shipping routes. And here's something wild. China is providing the technical expertise, Russia the raw materials, India the manpower coordination, and Brazil the agricultural integration knowledge. Second, energy independence projects, solar farms in Morocco, hydroelectric in Ethiopia, geothermal in Kenya. But there's one energy project that could completely reshape global power dynamics. I'll reveal that in just a moment. Third, digital infrastructure, 5G networks, fiber optic cables, digital payment systems, all built with BRICS technology standards, not Western ones. Now, about that game-changing energy project I mentioned. Nigeria is exploring a massive natural gas pipeline funded by BRICS Bank money, using Russian technology that could supply energy to half of West Africa. This single project could make West Africa energy independent from Western oil companies within a decade. But here's what nobody's prepared for: the ripple effects these projects will have on global finance. Now we get to the part that's keeping Western policymakers up at night. The BRICS Bank conducts transactions in local currencies and Chinese yuan. That means African countries can borrow and repay without using US dollars. Do you realize what this means? For the first time since independence, African countries can engage in major financial transactions without going through New York banks. Traditional IMF and World Bank loans come with interest rates tied to Western markets. BRICS Bank offers more flexible terms, often with lower rates and longer repayment periods. Egypt's BRICS Bank loan for renewable energy came with a 2.5% interest rate and 20-year repayment term. The equivalent World Bank loan? 4.8% interest with 15-year repayment and structural adjustment requirements. But here's the big picture. Africa is diversifying its development partners for the first time in 60 years. And the response from Western institutions? Well, let me show you what they're doing behind the scenes. The World Bank suddenly announced $17 billion in new African projects. The IMF is offering reform packages with fewer conditions. The EU launched something called the Global Gateway, specifically to compete with BRICS infrastructure projects. Translation: they're panicking. For decades, they had a monopoly on development finance in Africa. Now they're scrambling to stay relevant. But there's something else happening that could change everything. Now, before you think this is all sunshine and rainbows, let me give you the reality check nobody else will. Critics argue that BRICS financing, especially from China, creates debt dependency. They point to Sri Lanka's port situation as a warning. Here's the nuanced truth. Yes, debt sustainability matters. But African countries are now comparing multiple options instead of being forced into a single model. Many African governments lack the technical capacity to manage large infrastructure projects effectively. But here's where it gets interesting. The BRICS Bank includes capacity building and technology transfer as part of their funding packages. Political instability in some African countries makes long-term projects risky investments. However, the BRICS Bank has shown more flexibility in working through political transitions than traditional Western institutions. So what does all this mean for Africa's future? Let me break down the 3 scenarios that could play out. Here are the 3 possible futures I see for Africa's relationship with the BRICS Bank. Best case, Africa successfully balances multiple development partners, getting better deals and maintaining sovereignty while building world-class infrastructure. Middle case, Mixed results, with some successful projects and some challenges, but overall, increased negotiating power for African governments. Worst case, Africa replaces Western dependency with Eastern dependency, just with different conditions. But here's what I think will actually happen. I believe we're witnessing the birth of truly multipolar development finance. African countries will become more sophisticated at playing different partners against each other to get the best deals. This is the most important shift in African development finance since independence. Whether you're African, an investor, or just someone who cares about global economics, you need to understand these changes. What do you think? Are BRICS Bank projects the key to African development, or just a new form of dependency? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you want to stay ahead of these geopolitical shifts, subscribe and hit the notification bell. I will be breaking down how the African Continental Free Trade Agreement intersects with these BRICS projects and why that combination could create the world's next economic powerhouse. And if you think this BRICS Bank story is big, wait until you see what's happening with African digital currencies and Chinese payment systems. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.